Hi, and welcome back, everybody, to our next session of the day. We're joined by David Blake, the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of LearnIn. And today we're going to be covering corporate training reimagined for today's workforce. I'm not going to take up any more time. David, over to you.
Appreciate it. Glad to be with all of you guys. We are going to look a little bit past, present, and future. But I'm going to tell you a story about once upon a time when you were a student and then you got a job and you were an employee. That is now a fantasy world. That is no longer the world we live in. As we look to the future, I think we're headed to somewhere that none of us have entirely ever experienced anywhere in any organization in our lifetime, but do believe we are headed to a new normal. And we're going to talk about the repercussions of that, how we get there, how we do so successfully and with impact and with great outcomes. But really, what is happening? Technology is now scaling faster than humanity can learn. So that means the skills gap is getting bigger every single day, every single week, every single month, every single year. It is expected over the next 10 years to get bigger everywhere in the world except for it, which is bringing so many people up through sort of into the knowledge economy and through their educational systems, but everywhere else in the entire world. Over a 10-year, the expectation is that the skills gap is getting bigger. So what does that mean? Well, that means some good news and some bad news. That skills gap means lost opportunity. That skills gap means pressure to meet our objectives as organizations. The good news, the silver lining, is that the premium on skills, the premium on learning, the premium on expertise is going up and up and up and up and up. So what that means is any organization, any individual, any team that can get good at and master upskilling, do so effectively and at scale, is going to have a increasing competitive advantage. And all of that is the macro context that leads us to this chart, which is in a world in which learning and expertise and the premium on it, the demand goes up and the premium we get from doing it goes up, it does mean we are going to be doing more of it. The organizations that don't will follow behind. The organizations that do will keep pace. And so that's putting this pressure. We used to exist in this world where you were a student, you studied full time for 4, 6, 9 years, and then you applied it over a fairly stable career, 30, 40, 50 years. We saw some pressure. As tuition continued to rise, students became part-time workers. As the premium, as the half-life of skills was diminishing, as the premium for learning was going up, we saw really over now about 35-year time horizon, the introduction of executive education. And in the last 5 to 7 years, this sort of Cambrian explosion of online asynchronous learning in the MOOCs. So we've been moving from these true bookends. We've been moving to this world where most students are now part-time workers and most employees are part-time learners. But in a world in which the premium continues to go up and the need continues to go up, it is going to push employees even more this direction. We are going to get to where, in the future, there is no distinction between a learner and an employee. The future will leave no room left, no distinction. We will be full-time students, full-time workers over the entirety of our lives. Looks like having an issue with that one.
It's actually, yeah. I think it's actually been moved. So
it's right. It wasn't important anyway. It was, I'm sure, whatever it was, of no consequence. We'll roll with it. It looks like a few things have happened maybe here. All right. I'm going to pick up at this quote, guys. So I want to pause here for a moment. I'm going to read this. There is a need to retool yourself and you should not expect to stop. People who do not spend 5 to 10 hours a week in online learning will obsolete themselves with technology. Randall Stevenson, CEO, AT&T, 2016. Now, I have used this quote in many, many presentations over the years. I celebrated this quote when it came out. Here was CEO of one of the world's largest telcos, one of the world's bigger companies, saying that if we are not learning 5 to 10 hours a week on our own, we're going to become obsolete. Behind this, AT&T picked up what was one of the most progressive and the most successful corporate upskilling initiatives ever conducted. So over the course of about 4 years, they had over 50% of their employee base participate. They did very innovative things. They were one of the very first partners, corporate partners with Udacity. They were a corporate sponsor to the very first ever MOOC degree, which was with Georgia Tech University. This was an incredibly progressive, incredibly forward-looking CEO and organization and the upskilling initiative that they conducted. But now, today, I look back and I use this quote and think about it very differently. The biggest barriers to upskilling are time and money. And CEOs, AT&T's entire upskilling initiative is called Workforce 2020. In the entire initiative, they did not give employees any time, on-the-job time to learn. So that expectation of 5 to 10 hours a week the expectation was that was on your time. Now they provided programming, content, courses. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars, hard cash dollars, creating this program and administering it, but they didn't give any time. And this is a cautionary tale for all of us to learn from, because to solve one of the barriers, but not both of the barriers, has sticky, unintended consequences. And that is that while all of us have 24 hours in a day, not all of us have the same amount of discretionary time. For those who have a long commute, for those who are caretakers, for those who are single parents, for those who work a second job, which many AT&T frontline employees actually do, many things can contribute to not being able to give discretionary time to your personal self-development. So what we see is that right now inside organizations, the people who are most likely to participate in corporate upskilling programs are the highest educated and the most skilled individuals. That also tends to skew heavily white and heavily male. And so the upskilling initiatives can have the unintended consequence of being a huge wedge inside of your organization. It can be a huge wedge that works against your DEI or diversity initiatives. It can be a huge wedge that keeps the more diverse employees inside your organizations where they are, and letting the more educated, the more white, and the more male employees up and through your organization. So we are going to look back as to where we've been on this journey of upskilling as enterprise organizations and where things are going to go. Keep in mind that future where we are no longer full-time employees or full-time students, but we are increasingly hybrid through the entirety of our career. So I would assume that most listening to this topic and listening to me know a bit about the history of corporate universities. But the very first was, of course, the story G.E. Crotonville. And that is where this little story begins, which is in the 60s, before the adoption of the internet and the World Wide Web, and in a world in which calling another country ran a very large long-distance bill, organizations that were going global needed to be able to infuse their knowledge and their culture and their processes and their systems globally. But how do you do that when you don't have the internet? How do you do that when it's expensive to pick up the phone and that's a limited medium? Well, what they did is created the corporate university, this central hub oriented around a traditional university model where you flew your employees from around the world to that centralized point and took them through a fairly traditional learning experience. So I just started getting double camera. There we go. If anyone can put in chat if there's any video issues. Now, what that meant is it was all about management. It was management centered. It was about, we are a global company and we need to give people the knowledge, the tools, the capability, the culture, the processes to then get back on an airplane, fly back to France, to fly back to Singapore, and be an effective manager and leader in the GE way. Now, as the introduction of the internet, it changed all of that. All of a sudden, we don't actually need to put people on airplanes and fly them from halfway around the world and other continents to bring them to a centralized location. And we did see the introduction of e-learning. And now over a 15-year arc, that meant very different things, from very distributed learning, CD-ROM based, all the way to our most recent MOOC-driven, on-demand, asynchronous, democratizing the world's best professors and subject matter experts and giving people on-demand access. But that tended to be about knowledge. So now we can disseminate knowledge with grace and scale. We can help you to know the information that you need. Now, where we're at is that the world has kind of been flooded. So you see in pink, the transition at first was not digital and it was costly to scale. The transition that we're in right now was essentially there's too much content and not enough context. And I would add not enough application. So you decide you want to run a marathon. You want to become an athlete. You want to get into CrossFit. We have to appreciate the distinction. And this is the distinction of where we've been and where we are about to go. You can get on YouTube and you can find incredible now content and resources around CrossFit. You can find almost infinite YouTube content, people giving you the form and their sets and their journey of their workouts, how they became a CrossFit athlete. And that is valuable. That's the knowledge. But we have now matured in our organizations, and the ecosystems and our solutions and the innovation has really been about knowledge, learning, and content. But we all know that watching, although we all wish this weren't true, just watching 15 CrossFit videos is not going to turn you into an athlete. That is about doing the hard work of applying and contextualizing the knowledge, of putting it to use and putting it to practice. And the future, where we are now, is not knowledge and not learning centric. The future is going to be application, capability, skill centered. And while much of the corporate university and corporate academies of the last 15 years have been virtual and online, really the next iteration is to the campus is for it to disappear entirely. A world in which we are a student, hybrid, employee the entirety of our lives is a world in which that learning has to be fully integrated. Now we have a slide later. I'm not just talking about in the flow of work. In the flow of work is a very knowledge-centric paradigm. Bring the knowledge to you in the flow of work. In a skills-centered world, you can't upskill me in Slack. You just can't. You can't upskill me in Microsoft Teams. There is absolutely nothing you can ever do to administer a skill to me in the flow of work, because it's no longer about knowledge. It's no longer about learning. It's about application. So we are going to look at, what does this future look like? And here's the thing. This isn't a failing of anyone. It's not a failing of me as an entrepreneur and the innovation is not a failing as you as a learner. It's not a failing of you as a practitioner. This is truly just about We are solving problems, and we tend to do so in the ones that confront us first and in the ones in which we have the capabilities to solve. And so we have been pushing and advancing and evolving sort of what tools and innovation we have and what problems we're trying to solve. And, we're just digging through the layers of Earth, and kind of the layer of Earth that we've exposed next is this one of skill building and application. And now it's a really exciting frontier, because this means we are going to be able to move from unlocking value around, did you learn and what are your learning outcomes, to what skills did you develop? Did we close the skills gap of the organization? Were we able to, our metrics are going to go from learning metrics to mobility and talent metrics to business metrics, which we've all talked about for the entirety of all of our careers. We've been at different points in this journey, but we are pushing deeper into this advancement. So the last few years, it's, learning LMS systems were predominantly about regulatory and compliance-driven learning. With the advent of the LXP, with this Cambrian explosion of the ecosystem of learning, we got into learning culture. We got into development. It's been heavily knowledge-centric. Now, this is the future. We are going to need to solve next building skills and building the talent. Look, this slide and next is ultimately about the fact that while as we look to the future, we can do so with great optimism. The truth is that there's going to be winners and losers. That's the truth. The skills gap is getting bigger every day, week, month, year, decade. It is not getting smaller. There is nothing you can change the rate at which your organization learns. You are powerless to change the rate at which technology is scaling across the world. And so far, we have not yet invented anything as an entire species that can catch up to the rate at which technology is scaling. The skills gap is getting bigger, and there are consequences, and some of your organizations are going to fall behind, and it is going to be painful, and it is going to be expensive. Now, again, silver lining, the goal is to clear the chasm, to be at the front, to be on at the forward end of this, to be providing the skills, the development, the knowledge, the learning, to be reaping the rewards of that increased premium on expertise, knowledge, and learning and skills. In so doing, you will be able to stay at the front. You will be able to capture the increased ROI. As we look at, what is the cost right now of this kind of knowledge-based learning that we do? For the most part, and I think we all know this as practitioners, it's really hard. It's fairly ineffective. Now, that doesn't mean we should stop, because learning at the end of the day is an organic process. It's hard and it's expensive, and our brains at the end of the day don't retain all information no matter what we do. But as you look at these numbers, it's not awesome. 64% spent internally versus 36% on external vendors and course providers. Misaligned, 70% of employees say they aren't taught the skills they need to do their job. Dissatisfied, 75% of 1,500 managers surveyed from 50 companies were dissatisfied with their training. Unapplied, just 12% of employees apply what they learn training to their jobs. If we are going to find gains, if we're going to find ourselves at the front of this, we've got to find those efficiencies. I just came, I'm here at Park City, Utah at a conference, so I had to sneak away from a session to give this session with all of you. But the great resignation is there's going to be winners and losers to that. And just heard an organization talk about how they are losing people that they value and that they wish that had stuck around, but they are right now in a net win position, because other companies are losing great people and the talent they've been able to attract into the organization. Now, we're just in a moment of influx. We're in a moment of change. The single, there's a report that just came out about 36 hours ago from the World Economic Forum. It came out since my slides were due for this, but talked about there is sort of 5 dimensions that employees cite when they're talking about, do they stay at their company right now, and what would make them leave and what would make them join a company. And the most poignant of which is skill development and investing in employees' skills and learning. There will be winners and there will be losers. Right now, one of the biggest levers you have at your disposal, both to win net new attractive talent and retain those you want, is investing in their development. How does all of this come together? We've seen, we can look back over our history. We know that kind of the hybrid learner worker is the future. We know that we need to move from knowledge to skills, from context to content to context. Really, I believe we've got to bring it all together. It isn't, and do hear me on this, it isn't that we are walking away from our past. We are building upon it. That knowledge is important. That management philosophy of Crotonville from 60 years ago is important. We just have to build on it. And as you look at what is missing, we have seen sort of the early zeros in 2010 was when the LMS brought e-learning online and had a fundamental sort of radical role to play in disruption and innovation. And for the most part, as we, I think, all appreciate and know, for the most part, the LMS has not driven any innovation in the last 20 years. But it doesn't mean it's any less important. We all still have it as a building block and as that foundation. But it really was built for the company. It was built for HR. It was built for L&D. It was built for regulatory considerations. It was built for compliance. And then for those of you who don't know me, David Blake, the co-founder and founding CEO of Degreed, which created and continues to lead by orders of magnitude the LXP category. And that was building for the employee. Not what does the company need you to learn, but what do you need to learn? Not what you have to learn, but what do you want to learn? Your personal development as the driving consideration. But there has been no meaningful innovation in line of business learning in my adult lifetime. And I think that's where we've got to go next, because if skills are the future, if it's about application and contextualizing knowledge and learning, that gets done in the business, that gets done on the job. But there have been no meaningful innovations around line of business learning. And we believe that is the future. And we shorthand, it's nomenclature we've had for a long time. We hope to give it new life, but we are calling that the future of the corporate academy. I think this helps to frame, again, this isn't a instead of, this isn't a displacement of, this is as you map the needs that you have inside your organization, there's a quadrant that we need to think about anew. And so the just-in-time learning, the in the flow of work learning, that tends to be, if it's at employee discretion, that's the LXP, that's the curiosity, the learning culture type learning agility. If it's business critical, that tends to be business, the performance support. This is getting you unstuck. This is helping you know that formula in Excel. As you look at the employee discretion about their future, that's about creating a long arc learning journey. As you think of business needs, that really is where academies come into play. And you see a couple bullet points here. I'm not even going to hit them because we are about to hit 4 slides that go double click and go deep on this. Now, first, this is not just me seeing this. This isn't just us at LearnIn who are feeling this and believing this. We have heard this. Inside this summer, we talked to 350 enterprise organizations about this topic. We have found that this is a need that is being felt, that people are beginning to verbalize and articulate. And Josh Burson being very helpful in kind of giving words to it. But as you look, we've been in that knowledge-based, learning-based, flow of work-based learning. And the future is the academy. I've got to go pretty fast. We are happy to distribute these slides. I'm going to hit it here and then skip over my next 2, which goes even deeper. But as you look at, well, what distinguishes an academy? It's led by subject matter experts and driven by the business. It tends to be cohorted and synchronous rather than asynchronous and on demand. Why? because watching a CrossFit video is easy, but doing the CrossFit exercise is hard. And it's better if you have someone there with you. It tends to have mentoring and coaching. Why? Because this is harder. Applying it, learning the skill, developing, running, exercising, lifting is harder than watching the video. So you have to have the mentoring, the coaching, the cohorting. You have to have real support. You've got, it's rather than about learning outcomes, it's about that talent mobility. Now, we have given sort of a side-by-side comparison of, the world we've been in versus the future state. I think this is especially helpful given it's a lot of text. We will plan anyone who's interested in this to distribute it. But I'm going to call out very quickly two things. One is time and money. Learning content is actually quite capital efficient. Developing skills, the truth is that it's not. The World Economic Forum says the average cost to upskill an employee is $24,800. It's expensive and it takes a lot of time. And so we are going to have to begin to provide the systems and support. And that really is where Learn In Academies come into place, is that, you are going to need the knowledge, the content, the programming, the curriculum to develop yourself and your people. But then it's got to be supported. It's got to be supported with that cohort, that synchronous, scheduled accountability, transparency, follow-up, mentorship, application. And that is the main heart of all of this. And then, truly developing skills, you have to apply, get feedback, and do the process again. We are here to give you that integrated campus. Really think of it as invisible. It doesn't live in an LXP. It doesn't live on LearnIn. It doesn't live in an LMS. This has to live integrated into where you are applying and developing that. And so we do that through content, contextualizing it, sessions, coaching, projects, but we map it to a learning journey. This ends up on your calendar, in your emails. It's fully integrated. There is no destination. It's just where you are. We are here at the end. We've got 2 surveys, but also happy to take any question and answers. I will leave this one up. Are you planning, contemplating, or thinking about being interested in setting up an academy to build job ready skills? Academies being synchronous, cohorted, blending, contextualized learning experiences. While some of you guys are responding here, I will say I had a very interesting conversation with one of the big 4 accounting firms who said, and it's the first company I've heard say this, they are moving entirely back to synchronous learning. The world has been almost entirely asynchronous. One of the big 4 accounting firms is moving entirely back to synchronous. Now it's virtual, but synchronous. How many of you are planning on doing any synchronous cohorted academy-like learning? Looks like about half. That's fantastic. All right. With that, I've got just a minute or 2 for any quick take questions.
Thank you so much, David, for that insight. And we do have a couple questions. I know a lot of people would love these slides. So if it's available, we will be sending it over to you. And again, this session is available on demand. So you can watch David do his presentation as many times as you'd like.
I'd recommend
so
6. It really blossoms 6. The 6th time you watch it. Yeah.
We did have a question where it was a little bit earlier on in your presentation, but it was one of our audience members said that it was a fairly bold statement you made about aligning upskilling as a negative on DEI programs. Where did you get that insight? How did you come about that statement?
Anyone, David Blake at LearnIn, or David at LearnIn, they're aliases of each other. You can email me. I will provide this report that came out that I referenced 36 hours ago is the freshest. It's got the evidence. I am happy to provide references and support to that. But I will just say this. Think about, we have spent 75 years in debate, criticism, critique, lawsuits, Supreme Court cases around equity and access in higher education. And we still haven't gotten that perfect. And if you think about how much debate, critique, regulation, lawsuits, Supreme Court cases has there been about equity and access in corporate L&D? And the answer is almost none. And so you think just by good luck, we happen to get it all, right. The truth is we aren't. The truth is that most corporate upskilling initiatives right now are putting white men up and through organizations, and it tends to under-index on diverse and minority populations and who are being left behind.
All right, perfect. Thank you. Unfortunately, that is all we have time for today. However, I would love it if you could answer a couple questions offline, and we'll be sending it over to our audience members so that they have access to all of that information in written form.
Happy to.
But thank you so much, David, for your time, and I hope you had fun. We're off to our next session with Coursera, which you can join in the link at the bottom of your screen once again, and I will see you there.